Hey guys, Youngblood with you for the 43rd episode of the Unbox. Starting off with a question from Holy Buffalo Wings, saying, log in and out, then back in with the beds would be nice for bigger ships. I'm worried that I have to keep returning to port to pick up friends. I know they could take a ship out to meet me, but then what are you supposed to do with the extra ship? Yeah, I think this is an interesting topic, and it's one that was actually on my mind not too long ago, trying to figure out how this was actually going to work. In a smaller ship, it makes a lot of sense. You log out, you log back in, all of a sudden you're in the same spot in space, and boom, that's kind of where you're at. Things get a little bit more complicated when you start talking about multi-crew ships, because then all of a sudden you've got maybe, you're taking a Carrack out for a very long journey, and, you've got buddies that want to join you and maybe don't want to constantly join you. CIG's mentioned a little bit of something that I think is going to help out in this sort of situation, and that's specifically in regards to the ability to almost like Agent Smith into an NPC. So, if you are the captain of your Carrack and you're going out on a journey and a buddy wants to join you for a little bit, they could all of a sudden kind of potentially warp into that character NPC, take them over for a little while, and then potentially log back out, and the NPC then takes back over. Now, That's all well and good, and I think that's something that makes a lot of sense. There's questions about how that's all going to work out and what that means. If you're on a really long journey and you all start together on that journey, are you able to then decide to kind of log off and log back on and make it Port Alizar or another space station somewhere else, or maybe in your hangar? We need to kind of figure out how that's all going to work, because I think there's a couple different ways you could go with it. You could either take the realistic approach, like you're committing to going on this long trip, and if you want to get out of it, you need to find a way back to a ship or something along those lines. The more gameplay-friendly way of doing it would be letting you choose where you want to spawn, take on that NPC, swap out, and then kind of bounce around. So it's hard to really say how that's going to work, and I think at this point it's something that CIG's even not 100% positive on what it's going to be. But I think having that Agent Smith ability to kind of jump into an NPC's body here or there is going to be helpful. But I think there's some questions that need to be ironed out, specifically as far as, what if you don't have NPCs on your ship? Or if a person logs out, maybe somebody's only going to play for an hour, they jump on your ship, they log out. Do you get an NPC in that point? I think the answer there is yes. But then how does payment work? Are you going to have to pay that NPC at the end of the day? Does the player get a cut of that? And those are all complications that we need to kind of figure out. And I think we're going to start probably getting our first taste of those and things with 3.0 when it comes around, because we're starting to get more of the economy and the different roles fleshed out a little bit. Joe's Got More says, question, any thoughts on how they will try and balance accidents versus intentionally killing somebody? I ask because a pirate is trying to sneak on board a ship, and the ship, not knowing a person is EVAing on top, moves and kills that person or that pirate in monitored space. The victim gets a wanted star on them for killing the pirate. It happened to me in the baby PU. Yeah, this is a really interesting one, and I think what we've talked about before from the developers has been specifically in regards to who is the aggressor. Now, in your instance here, that person that was trying to board your ship hasn't necessarily done anything wrong as far as the law is concerned, for all that they know that maybe they were just out there in space floating around and you happened to, railroad them. That's an interesting possibility that needs to be considered. So how that all ends up looking, we're going to have to kind of see. I think right now, the way the game is working is exactly what you kind of mentioned seeing in the baby PU. It's going to be hard to say that you're not at fault, even though they had bad intentions, because the intention is something that's hard to prove, especially for a game engine that can't really read the player's mind. If you were to take it to like a real, a jury, the jurors would probably say, well, that person was obviously trying to board your craft. They had no reason to be inspecting outside of your ship or some harmless activity. So is the game going to be able to put in logic like that to be able to make those determinations, or is there going to be some sort of council that kind of makes those decisions, and how does the wanted status actually work? Elite Dangerous is one that never really got that figured out. Sometimes a federal ship would end up flying a little too close to you, and, you would be flying in a straight line, they would fly into you or your lasers, you accidentally shot them, and then all of a sudden you became wanted because you shot or crashed into somebody else. That wasn't your fault, you were a victim of circumstance. The question is, how is Star Citizen going to be able to make that determination? And I don't know what that's going to be yet, because it's really complicated when you start talking about players' intentions. Emil Shervin Brendan snuck 5 questions in here, kind of cheated a little bit, but that's all right. A lot of these are going to be I don't know answers. The first one is, how many dragonflies can I put in a constellation? I don't know. I would say definitely at least one, probably two. I don't think you're going to be able to fit three in there just based on the size. But, it is nice, and it's an interesting ship to deploy a dragonfly from, considering you get that landing pad that kind of just drops out the bottom, or that loading dock thing. You could probably deploy dragonflies from a constellation pretty easily. My gut says two, but until we really see how compact they get when they're folded up, we won't really know. Question 2 is, how many people are playing the game on a weekly basis today? It varies drastically by time of day, whether there's a new patch that came out, and then just overall stability of the build. I would say on the high end, it's probably 10 to 15,000. Just on a general day, it's probably more than that when we actually start talking about when we start talking about new patches and new releases coming out. 2.6 with Star Marine is going to bring a huge amount of players in that are curious to see what this whole new thing is about. Third question is, how many planets and star systems are planned? Right now it's about 100. That's going to go up or down a little bit. I think 101 was the most recent number I saw. But that number is going to fluctuate drastically. They're not going to just continuously add star systems, because Roberts has said that he wants to create a really in-depth environment to basically where there's a story, a kind of a feeling to every system that you're going to visit. Not like Elite or No Man's Sky, where it's just endless basically, and everything just ends up being procedurally generated, including entire systems, because then you don't get backstories to those locations. So with that lore and history piece, we're not going to see as many, but they're going to be very, very massive. So there's going to be plenty to do in those 100 or so systems. Fourth question is, when is a good time to buy the game if I'm looking for a somewhat completed universe with jobs and cities like the ones we've seen on concept arts? It's probably 2017 quarter 4. It's a total ballpark here. Now, 3.0, which is kind of slated for the end of the year or beginning of the next, is really going to be showcasing, like cargo, bounty hunting, piracy, some exploration. Like those types of things are going to be coming. So as far as jobs, they're going to be there, but it's not going to be completed by any means. So after Squadron 42 comes out, and after we move past 3.0, I think we can start to say that it's going to continue to develop. But if you want to be really safe and say, I'm not buying until these are ready, I would probably slate 2018. And for your last question here, how many large cities are expected? It's hard to say. We know there's 100 systems, or that's kind of the game plan. Not every planet is going to be inhabited. There's going to be probably cities on moons, so we can't even really figure out how many celestial bodies there are. I would say that if there's 100 star systems, there's probably going to be maybe 1,000 cities, or maybe 500 cities, or something like that. There's probably going to be ones that are more detailed and more fleshed out that you're actually going to be seeing, and then there's also going to be ones that are almost like player-created habitations, and that you might find like more like villages and towns, but they're not going to necessarily be the same as like skyscrapers and massive cities. Top Dog 21-0 says, how will the melee system work, and how will getting hurt in different places affect of the body affect you? Will you be able to fight without guns, and also will there be destructive weather? We're going to find out very soon. I think primarily guns are obviously going to be your best bet. We've already seen some of the mechanics as far as the ability to like raise your gun and kind of move your sights around and stuff. So, and we know it's built on the Cry engine. So the ability for a melee system is certainly there. Additionally, there's also like the advocacy kit that you get when you bought like the Cutlass Blue, which is actually like bounty hunting gear, and it looked like it probably is including like a baton and like some cuffs. So if those types of things are actually in place, we can obviously assume that there's going to be melee combat in there. Now, what that fight is going to look like, we don't really know. You're probably going to be able to crack somebody on the skull, maybe stab them with a knife, who knows. But those types of things will be coming. But as far as damage to your body in different places and how it's going to affect you, that's absolutely going to happen. They talked about the, and it's already starting to happen, like with the item system 2.0, there's also like the body system, like in the ship system, like it's all part of that item system. Meaning that there's going to be more localized damage. So if your legs take a lot of damage, you're going to have slower movement speed. If you're shot up bad enough, you're going to be bleeding, and all of a sudden you may have like blackouts or redouts, kind of like you do when you're flying. There's going to be symptoms that are directly related to the damage that you've actually taken. For example, if you end up maybe taking a lot of damage in your arm, you're only able to hold your gun with one hand, and then maybe recoil becomes a bigger problem. And then you also ask about, will there be destructive weather? Yes, the lore has talked about several different planets that have caustic environments, some that you can't even land on because they're so bad. So there will be things like acid rain and smog clouds and dust storms and all those different types of things that are going to impact you as a person and your ship. Borengar629 says, hello Youngblood, really enjoyed the series. Thanks for the effort and congratulations to the addition of the family. Thank you. I have a question about single-seat fighter ships. I, for example, have a Super Hornet, but I started to think about if it's going to be of any use to me in the game. Right now, you fly through the baby PU, which is no problem. But I wonder what I will do when the ship in the PU starts to grow. It has no bed, so I have to stay near civilized systems. But these will be guarded by the UEE military. So what is the purpose of a highly specialized fighting ship there? Do you see any use for a fighter unless you're part of an organization specialized in combat and security that has a carrier ship at hand? Well, first off, the Super Hornet's a two-person ship, but I get your point. As far as the ability and the range and all those sorts of things, it's going to really be starting to be fleshed out soon, because with the addition of the system expansion, we're going to really start to feel the effects of range. Now, the Super Hornet is a ship that could dock on a Idris, it could dock on a Javelin, it could dock on a Bengal, and there's possibly other options there, but it is going to be limited. It is a carrier-based type of, ships. So, that's a factor. Now, you could also look at it and say, well, I could just, fuel up in whatever system I jump to. So you're not just stuck with whatever fuel you leave with. You could land at a, Cry-Astro and fill up on your journey and technically make it all the way across the universe. But, so that factor is there. You're going to be able to do that. As far as, what the purpose of it is, if you're staying in UEE space, your PMC missions, your combat missions, your bounty hunting missions, they're going to be less than if you went to less civilized space. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to be able to do it. There's going to be those jobs there. And, there's also going to be escort jobs where maybe you're just following a whole series along a journey just to protect them. So there is absolutely a role. I think most people are probably going to gravitate towards more purpose-built ships like, cargo ships and mining ships and exploration ships, because most people are probably not going to end up in the combat business because it's a little bit harder to do and it's a little bit harder to find work probably. But there's always an affinity to get into a fighter, and there's absolutely a role. You just have to kind of figure out different ways to do it based on the range capabilities of your ship. Joe Beans, are there questions from only patrons, or can you just ask them here? You can just ask them here. Patrons get 2 questions, so they get their questions answered a little bit faster, but these questions or the answers are for everybody. Do you think that they will add VR support like the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive? Yeah, it's absolutely coming. It's planned. It's I think it's one of the stretch goals. It's just really low priority right now. As far as I know, there's some workarounds to actually get it working. I personally don't have one, so I don't stay real up to date on the news there, but that support is 100% a thing. And speaking of patrons, our patron questions for today from Shepard. Did CIG mention if 3.0 was going to be more than one exploration planet we saw demoed? So the Levski planet, or I guess Levski is the city, and the planet that you can actually land on there is probably going to be the only one that we can really land and explore and do those types of things. If they have more, they're playing it kind of fairly close to the chest. I haven't seen answers on that yet. Doesn't mean they haven't done it. There was a whole lot of information that came out, and it was hard to stay updated on all of it. My gut says that that's probably going to be the only one to really test out the mechanics, and then once that's actually proven to work, the following releases will add more planets that we're going to be able to explore and land on. But my gut says that that's probably going to be our only one. I wouldn't be surprised, since ArcCorp has actually been developed pretty well, and Area 18 has been, if there's soon to be an additional landing zone there. And then all of a sudden you get kind of that seamless environment between, the universe and ArcCorp. It's no longer picking Port Alizar or PlanetSide. You can just fly to PlanetSide. And our final question today is from Rakish. Why not use shields rather than wings while in atmosphere to add lift? Why would future technology not allow for reshapeable shields that could become wing-like and allow much more flexibility when different atmosphere types? And this was an interesting question that kind of spawned out of a discussion we were having on the Patreon channel. And I don't really know the answer, because the shield technology is really hard to talk about. It's hard to explain. Maybe it has to do with the actual generator. It creates a bubble because it puts an even amount of force out, internal and external, to create that shielding. Now, you could look at that the same way and say, well, if you're creating a bubble, you could technically have a different generator that then creates wings. You could also look at that situation and say, well, if your shield generator fails you, then you're going to plummet like a rock, and that creates some interesting emergent gameplay. My guess with this is it's probably a really hard thing to program. Programming a sphere that goes around the ship and is your shielding is probably easy, or one that kind of mirrors the shape of your ship but just happens to be a meter off in every single direction. That's probably pretty easy. Giving you the ability to program shields in certain locations is probably difficult, but then there could also be lore reasons as well. Perhaps here, look at this today. Today we know that shields will slow down ballistic rounds, but ballistic rounds can still go through them. whereas energy rounds actually kind of hit and disperse and kind of melt the shields a little bit faster. So with that in mind, physical objects can still give through the shielding. So maybe when we start talking about, air or atmosphere, all of a sudden we're talking about particles and, different things that are not, just energy. They're actual like elements. If that's the case, maybe they just go through the shields. Maybe it's all of a sudden they can permeate. So while it may give you some level of lift, it's not going to give you that same effectiveness as an actual physicalized body that can really cruise over it without anything penetrating it. So that's maybe another option that could maybe be a scientific type of response. But, for those of you, and again, I like turning these over to the science nerds out there. If you have more knowledge than me on how any of this might work, please respond, because it's a really interesting topic. I don't think it's one that's going to go anywhere. I don't think we're going to see anything with that from CIG, but I think my explanation was pretty good. But if anybody has any other ideas, please toss them out there. So that's going to be it for this episode of The Inbox. I appreciate you guys watching. As always, get your questions in, and I'll talk to you guys later. Take care.